And I thought I would try and say something about comedy, but comedy in an older sense, maybe the original sense. This is comedy in the sense of Dante and the Divine Comedy. The idea that, in spite of terrible things that happen in the world, tragedies, in fact, there is a good ending that we can hope for where sadness and distress will be held and contained by love and joy, where that which seems chaotic will find an order. This is the notion of comedy that reaches back at least to Plato at the end of the Symposium, one of Plato's best known dialogues. The story goes that they talked all through the night about love and beauty, and they'd been drinking, and everyone had fallen asleep apart from Socrates. And as he left the symposium hall, as the sun rose to go back to the marketplace to begin his investigations afresh, sober, he asked the question, can there be a way of writing about tragedy that brings about a comedy? How we can, in a way, embrace the difficulties of life and yet hold on to the hope that the delights of life win out in the end. A question that is perennial for we human beings, but we feel it particularly keenly now. And it was one taken up by many playwrights, poets, philosophers since. Shakespeare probably is the best known in the English-speaking world. His comedies are often actually not laugh out loud, belly achingly amusing plays, and sometimes it's a bit of a mistake to try and perform them like that. What Shakespeare really meant by comedy was that for all the mistakes and errors that people make in life, things find an order and a connection, a harmony in the end. The lovers that were confused find the right beloved and get married. And he also pursued the slightly harder task in comedy, which is when really very terrible things happen. Can there be a way that that resolves? His later plays are sometimes put in this category, King Lear, A Winter's Tale. And it's the great challenge, you might say, of the human imagination to know how tragedy can be experienced with all its horror and sadness and fear, and yet still hold on to the sense that there can be a comedy that embraces life, that can be good, there can be a happiness which is reliable. Now, I think that must be the case for we human beings, because otherwise the terrible events of human history really would undo us, even annihilate us. And yet history seems to say that for all the horrors that undoubtedly happen and no doubt will continue to happen, there is a new day. The sun rises once again and people find a way not just to go on living, but to go on hoping. Comedy pushes through. And maybe that's a way in which comedy, as it's normally meant, helps us as well, because in a way what comedy does, what comedians do for us, is to enable us to take a step back from the immediacy of something that's happened, give it a twist, put it in a new context, and help us to have the catharsis of laughing about it. It's not possible when things are so serious, so terrible, when they're too close, but eventually a moment comes when it is possible to take that step back, provide a new context, and so find a way of being released from the horror, at least in some degree. I think it's also why the word wit has these two meanings. It both means that which makes us laugh, but also wit is a kind of wisdom, a capacity for insight. The word wit itself tells us that comedy is really important, in fact, because it enables us to see through the tragedy, to hold on to hope, and to find new possibilities for life. So, whilst you're thinking about comedy, remember this bigger sense as well. I think it's part and parcel, essential indeed, for the human spirit, particularly when tragedy clearly is so tangibly and horribly present. Remember that there's the possibility, the hope, I think actually the empirical truth that the good wins out in the end, that undoubtedly suffering and terrible things happen, but that in itself presumes a kind of prior love of life, a love of others, a love of what's good, which no doubt gets besmirched, even spoiled to the point of seeming ruin, and yet lives through to another day, to another dawn.